In 1986, this game took Japan by storm. While it took a little longer to catch on in the West, it's still a classic in its own right. It's Dragon Quest for the NES and Famicom. Dragon Quest released on May 27th, 1986. In Japan, that is. In North America, it launched in 1989, a 3-year gap. That's pretty significant. The game was directed and programmed by Koichi Nakamura, and the game was designed by Yuji Horii. The artwork for Dragon Quest was done by famed mangaka Akira Toriyama, and the music for Dragon Quest was done by Koichi Sugiyama. Dragon Quest is thought to be the father of JRPGs. J standing for Japanese, RPG standing for role-playing game. Supposedly, designer Yuji Horii was inspired by Ultima and Wizardry, but those are two RPGs that I've never played, so I really couldn't tell you. But today, I'm going to be going over Dragon Quest kind of as I've experienced it, reviewing the game and talking about what there is to see in it. While I own the Famicom version for Dragon Quest, I actually ended up playing the North American release for a few reasons. The first is battery saving versus a password system. I didn't really want to bother with a password system when battery saving exists. The second is it is an RPG, and while the language isn't too important, with just a simple key, it would be easy to understand what my different menu options were. English felt more natural for me. There are also multi-directional sprites in the North American release of Dragon Quest, and that means that when you're going left, right, up, and down in the overworld or in towns, your character, the hero, is going to respond by having an upward-facing sprite, a downward-facing sprite, whereas in the Japanese release, it is just... And that's not really what I wanted. The other thing is the text seems to be a little more readable in the Japanese version, meaning that it's so bold in the North American release that it's kind of like hard to read sometimes, and you kind of have to pause until everything is showing on the screen. But I did play on a 32-inch monitor with a high-def NES modded AV Famicom routed directly into it, so maybe it was just too big. I'm sure on a smaller screen, maybe the text would be a little bit more readable, but I kind of had to back up just to be able to read it. So let's get the basics out of the way for Dragon Quest. At its heart, Dragon Quest is an adventure game. It's a JRPG, but it's still an early game in the NES and Famicom library that's trying to figure out how to make you feel like you're on an adventure. It's a little bit of a different take on what an adventure game could look like as opposed to something like Zelda, which is more of an action adventure game as we know it today. The difference in release date is also important because in Japan, this game came out not too long after the first Zelda. It was kind of like almost back to back. And while Zelda wasn't released in the United States until 1987, it's still a pretty significant difference. But in Dragon Quest, you have a massive representational overworld. You see mountains, impassable mountains that I believe are called Craggly Mountains, plains, swamps that are poison, you've got trees, deserts, and water which is not passable. There are also bridges and other sort of things that you can pass through. It's a game about going into towns, into caves, and into dungeons, and the way that you get to those things is by traversing the overworld. The overworld consists of little sprites that represent these things, and when your player indicator collides with those sprites, it takes you into them. The goal of Dragon Quest, in a nutshell, is to get to level 20. But really, it's more than that. The goal is to grow stronger, to save the princess. Well, to maybe save the princess, you can beat the game without saving the princess. You can totally forget about the princess, which kind of makes saving her feel cooler. But it's about growing stronger, defeating the Dragon Lord, and saving the princess or just deciding not to save the princess. The combat in this game is turn-based combat where you select options from a menu system. It takes place in the overworld through random encounters, and it also takes place in different areas like caves and an abandoned town. Just there are certain combat zones where you'll be fighting enemies, and they're never seen on the map unless it's something like the final boss of the game, the Dragon Lord. You just kind of walk around and suddenly you're involved in a battle. The game has items that you can use to your advantage, armor to wear, weapons to wield, and lots of characters to talk to, which are important to pointing out exactly where you need to go. There's also a manual included with Dragon Quest, and since in the West there were a lot of extra copies of Dragon Quest printed, there were lots of tips in Nintendo Power, supposedly. I never had Nintendo Power, so I wouldn't know. But lots of clues telling players where to go, since a lot of Dragon Quest is just grinding or knowing where an item is that you need to pick up. And when you have both of those things together, you beat the game, basically. But at its core, Dragon Quest is a game where you fight enemies in order to grow strong enough to adventure further into the world. You start the game off in Tentacle Castle, which is right next to the town of 𝒆𝒕𝒓𝒐, and right at the beginning of the game, you can see across the river or strait, ocean, gulf. You can see across the water where the final place in the game that you'll need to go is, and that's Charlock Castle. Charlock's on an island, and you actually need a specific item to be able to get there. But everywhere else in the overworld, theoretically, you could get to barring random encounters. There's no real immediate barrier blocking you. There are natural barriers, though. The further you get away from that starting area, the more difficult the enemies begin to get. And so right from the get-go, you have this sort of natural and somewhat addicting pattern where you leave the castle, you bump into random enemies and you fight them, you gain experience points, you gain gold. When you run low on health, you can go to 𝒆𝒕𝒓𝒐 to stay at the inn and restore your health and magic points. And then I think at level 3, you're able to heal yourself. And then you can just talk to the wizard in the castle and he can restore your magic points. And you just kind of rinse and repeat until you feel like you're ready to push further in the world. If you should die though, and you will die, most likely, the penalty isn't too steep in Dragon Quest. It's half your gold and you start back at Tentacle Castle. So grinding, pushing further, looking further into the world. I know the question you're all asking yourselves, what is the story? So a long time ago, Erdrick, or Lodo in the Japanese version, defeated evil, ushered in an era of peace, and he did it with something called a ball of light. He gave that ball of light to the king at the time, and then he vanished. Everyone seemed pretty happy with this whole situation, except for the Dragon Lord. He stumbles across a dragon in a cave. He's scared, but then the dragon just obeys him. And so I guess he just feels really full of himself and decides he's going to take himself and his fleet of dragons to Tentacle Castle, attack the place, sack it. Erdrick comes back the next day, supposedly, which is really quick. I mean, he vanished and then he's back. What? But Erdrick comes and he gets something called the Rainbow Drop and uses that to go to the island where the Dragon Lord lives. And then he's never seen from or heard from again. But supposedly for a long time, things are kind of better, or there's just less monsters in the world or something. But one day the Dragon Lord just decides he wants to attack the castle again. But this time he steals the princess, stashes her away in a cave. Not even with him. She's just in some other cave. He just goes back to his castle and is like, there's monsters everywhere now. I guess that makes him happy. And then there's a legend that one of the descendants of Erdrick will bring peace back to the world and exterminate the monsters and defeat the Dragon Lord. And there are people who believe that, and there are people who don't. You are the hero, or descendant of Erdrick. And the kingdom's name is Alefgard. The monsters in this game don't move. They're just static images, but their artwork is really good. And in this game, if like you get hit by a monster, there are certain screen effects. For these menu style games, like a JRPG or just a turn-based game in general, it's really nice to have a little bit of flair, like something to make it more interesting because you really could just be playing this on the command line. You know, like there's no real reason why it even needs a graphical interface in some instances. So like if you're going to go all the way, I think they kind of did by hiring one of the most prolific mangaka artists they could in Akira Toriyama. And it really paid off because a lot of the sprites look fantastic. But the monsters are almost grouped into classes. You have a lot of different enemies technically, but there are only a few different types. There's usually 3 different monster types per class. The differences are colors, and sometimes like they'd add a little extra details like a sword or a shield or an axe or something like that. But the lowest is the slimes. You've got the blue slimes, which are like the first enemies in the game, and then the red slimes, and then the metal slimes. It took me a really long time before I even encountered a metal slime. One thing I knew kind of cursory before going into this is that metal slimes are rare and that they can give you a lot of XP, but that they run away frequently and they're hard to kill. They only have 4 HP, but they have incredibly high defense. It's always a treat to encounter a metal slime. Metal slime attacks you with hurt, the other ones just do physical attacks. The next sort of class of enemy are the Drakes, and they're just like the little bats. You've got the regular Drakes, and they just do physical attacks. The Magidrakes, which even though magic is in their name, they only really do physical attacks as well. And then finally, the Drakemas, which is my favorite. I really like the color palette that they chose for this one. It's kind of that tan with the pink eyes. The Drakemas can cast heal and hurt, and so they're like one of the first enemies you might see that can actually heal themselves, which is really annoying at first, but nowhere close to as annoying as later where you have some enemies that know heal more. The ghosts are the next of those sort of basic enemies that don't really mean a whole lot. You've got the standard ghost, the poltergeist, and the specter. The specter is pretty good because it can put you to sleep, but it's not going to be doing crazy amounts of damage usually. After the ghosts, you've got the magician class of enemy, which comes with the regular magician, the warlocks, and the wizards. They all will attack you sometimes regularly. They have regular attacks, but they tend to lean towards using magic. The scorpions are a really basic attacking enemy, and it's kind of good to level up on those basic scorpions when you're low level because they offer a lot of XP and a decent chunk of gold. But you've got the scorpion, the metal scorpion, and the rogue scorpion, and the only differences between them are the amount of damage they do and the amount of hit points they have. There are 2 types of enemies that you're only going to find in like dungeon style areas, and that is the drolls, the droll class of enemies, and the druins. The druins are a little easier, and you've got the druin and then the druin lord. The druin lord knows heal or hurt, but they're not too serious of a threat. The drolls are also kind of not too serious. It's kind of like, why do they even really exist? You've got the drolls, the regular ones, and the magidrolls, or sorry, the droll magis, and they can cast stop spell, but they're just not that interesting, and they're both kind of ugly. The skeletons are the class of enemy with the most variety. You have the skeletons, which just do physical attack, wraiths, which can heal and they also attack, wraith knights, which do more damage and they can also heal, and then finally the demon knight, which is just a blacked out version of that sprite, and they look pretty cool even though there's like not any detail, and also they're one of the only things that I ran away from in sort of my intermediate stage of the game where I was grinding in the desert. The next class of enemy is the wolves. These guys pack a serious punch usually, like they hit for a lot, but they also don't feel like they have as much HP. You've got the wolves, the wolf lords, and the werewolves finally. The wolf lords like to cast stop spell, and any enemy that has stop spell, it's like, I'm glad you casted that because it's just a turn of this encounter where you're not hitting me and I'm able to hit you. Stop spell is something you love to see. You hate to see sleep, and you hate to see heal more. And speaking of heal more, the next class of enemies are the wyverns. The regular wyverns you notice like when you're down in that southern peninsula south of Rimuldar, they just like, they hit way harder than the other enemies there, and like you want to get like usually like 1 level up from where you are when you're grinding the regular guys like the wraiths and the wolf lords before you feel like it's really worth it to attack the wyverns because they hit a lot harder and it takes like 1 or 2 more turns to get them down. But you've got the wyverns, the magi wyverns, which can put you to sleep, but usually by that point you're strong enough if you're fighting a magi wyvern to where sleep's not too big of a deal. But then the star wyverns are the most annoying enemy in the game, hands down, because they just have such a dumb looking sprite. I swear they come at a time where like you can get them like this close to dying and then heal more. and you get them all the way down and they heal more, and you get them all the way down and they heal more, and you rinse and repeat until you're having to heal yourself and you're just like, you know what, I might just run away from this encounter right now because it's not worth my time. Then you've got the Golem class, which is the coolest looking in the game. The Golems and the Knights are pretty much tied, but seeing Dragon Quest from afar, I've always admired the look of the Golems and the Stonemen. Goldmen, they give you hardly any XP, but they give you a ton of gold. And for a while in this game, when you are like in the middle stages of your journey, gold feels more important than experience because you really want to grind up to get that full plate, you want to get that magic armor, you want to get that large shield, and you want to get that broadsword and that flame sword. And so gold is just super valuable all through the early parts and all through like up until the point you hit probably around level 16. Once you find Erdrick's stuff, gold is actually completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter at all anymore, and you can just die as many times as you need. But you also have Stonemen, which as far as I'm aware only appear in the final castle of the game, and then you also have the Golem, which is a one-of enemy that has less HP but hits much harder than the Stonemen. That is only found outside the castle town of Cantland, which has just incredible reinforcements. Like, that's one of the only towns where it's like, I can see why this place still exists. Then you've got the Knight class. You have the regular Knights that can cast Stop Spell, the Axe Knights, which can cast Sleep and Stop Spell, and then finally the Armored Knights, which are one of the hardest enemies in the game, and the Armored Knights can also do heal more. And then lastly is the dragons. You have to fight one green dragon somewhat early on. I guess you could do it later, but to save the princess you have to fight one, and then the other ones are found kind of around Cantland and south of Cantland, and then in the final dungeon of the game. Well, actually they're not. You have blue dragons there. So you have green dragons, blue dragons, red dragons, and then finally the Dragon Lord, which is more like a magician, and then his second form, which is a full-on dragon with wings and everything breathing fire. All of the dragons can cast a spell called Breathe Fire, and the red dragons can put you to sleep, but they tend to just want to attack you, which is why I like fighting the dragons. They look cool, they give you lots of gold, they give you a big hefty chunk of XP, and they're one of my favorite enemies to grind later on in the game. But there's lots of different spells. You learn the heal spell at level 3, which allows you to heal a little HP. You learn the hurt spell at level 4, which allows you to do a little damage, more than you usually can by just fighting. You learn the sleep spell at level 7, which lets you sometimes put enemies to sleep. The radiant spell at level 9, which makes it so you don't have to use torches anymore when you go into dark areas, which almost all the areas are super dark. You learn stop spell at level 10, which allows you to sometimes stop enemies from casting spells on you, most notably like sleep. At level 12, you learn outside, which whenever you're in a cave or a dungeon area, you can cast that spell to immediately return to the exit. And this is useful because when you're in a cave and you're lost, this is one of the most claustrophobic games I've ever played. Whereas like when the lights are out and you're in a cave and you're trying, it's just like you cannot see. Radiant lets you see further, but like it really feels like you're lost in a cave in this game, and that's probably a testament to this game. It's hard to think of any games today where it's just like, I can't see, I don't know where I am. Return is maybe my favorite spell in the game. It's the closest thing to fast traveling. In harder areas, it actually costs more money to stay there, and so it makes sense to cast that spell when you're like wanting to go back and spend just a little bit of money to stay at the end. Repel is learned at 15, and if you've ever played a Pokemon game, that's what it is. At 17, you learn the best spell in the game, and that is Heal More. And then at level 19, you learn Hurt More, which is like Hurt, but it does way more damage. And it's funny because it doesn't feel like this game has that much stuff in it. When you're playing through it, it kind of just doesn't feel that deep, but there really is like a lot in here and a lot to talk about. I feel like you can go into a lot more detail about a lot of the things in this game, but I kind of want to talk about my personal experiences playing. The first time I played this game was in 2018. I'd actually been wanting to start playing and reviewing games a long time ago, and then I kind of got like a halfway in between setup around that time, and I had progressed to the point where I wanted to play this game, and I probably made it like 65% through the game or so, but it had been so long that I needed to restart for this time. And so this time I started a file and then I saved a little bit, and then I went on a big long session where I had saved up to buy the hand axe and several other things. I think I had the large shield, the hand axe, chainmail, and I was getting ready to go to the town of Cole to get the fairy flute, and then I bumped my desk and then it wobbled the cartridge, and then I lost all of that. And so I essentially had to start the game over. But it was a nice little palate cleanser, and I think it speaks to the game that I wasn't even really that upset. I was like, okay, cool. Now I feel like I'm in the groove. I'm ready to go. Sometimes restarting a game is actually a good thing for me. It's a really cool game, and I appreciate the design. And I think late on in the game, I kind of realized that it has this sort of pattern in the game where the real battle of this game is a battle with boredom. And I'm not trying to like dunk on this game or anything. I think it's a really good game. But like part of what pushes you into other regions of the game is like, I'm kind of tired of grinding these same guys. I feel I might be a little underleveled for what's coming up, but maybe it's worth the risk because I'm bored. Boredom is almost like something that the designers had in mind when they made this game, I think. The more bored you get, the more tempted you are to see what else is out there. So that I actually thought was really cool. But I have to say, I think the standout moments of playing Dragon Quest for me this time were getting Erdrick's armor when I didn't expect to be strong enough to defeat the Axe Knight that happened to be there. That was a huge moment. Saving the princess this time, I took her with me and I went like all over the place just to see if NPCs would notice whether I was carrying her or not. And I thought it was funny going up to the lady in the first town and you talk to her and she's like, I am not the princess. Like, first of all, I didn't think you were the princess. Second of all, I'm carrying her in my arms right in front of you. It stuck out to me in the town where you buy keys, Rimula, or gosh, some of these names are hard for me to remember, so I apologize for any mispronunciations. But the town that's kind of surrounded by water that you get magic keys in, I thought it was hilarious that there's this dude, and he's really only there to let you know, hey, you can actually go around if you're careful and not go back out into the overworld. But you talk to him and he's just, I'm waiting for my girlfriend. Talk to him again. I'm waiting for my girlfriend. I'm waiting for my girlfriend. I really liked that. The coolest part of this game to me was using the rainbow drop and then seeing this like very static world suddenly light up before my eyes. It felt like fireworks when I used the rainbow drop. Like, get ready, because we're about to go. And it was like, okay, let me just roll that rainbow drop footage real quick. But I've been talking for a while, and so I think it's time to wrap things up. So, final thoughts on Dragon Quest for the Famicom or Dragon Warrior for the NES. This is kind of a confusing game for me. I feel like the first time I ever tried it, I think it might have made a bigger impression on me in 2018 than it did today. Like, I didn't beat the game then, but I was still thinking like, man, this is really cool what it's doing. And I don't know if it's just like a post-Zelda high, but I'm still kind of like, I feel that game tugging at me more. This didn't leave as big an impression on me, and maybe it has the difficult job of following that game in this series in Retro Odyssey. But it was still obviously quality. I look at this game and I'm more excited for what's coming up with the sequel. I know they have 4 titles. Dragon Quest 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all on the NES. And I'm trying not to spoil myself because, I don't know, I'm just excited. I feel like just a little bit here and there, like the water moving outside, or maybe like some areas being darker, not just the exact same. The same music playing all the time. By the way, I turned the music down for a lot of it. Dragon Quest is a really interesting take on this practice of getting stronger in video games. It's also so obviously influential to other games that I have played, but I have to admit, it's a little bit of a chore to play Dragon Quest. You have to really want it. I don't think I could say that this is a must play, but I'm gonna sit on it for a little bit and then maybe in time it'll feel that way. I would say Dragon Quest is a game that you should play if you're really interested in the franchise, or if you want to see the kind of birthplace of JRPGs. But just know it is a grind. Dragon Quest is good, but the movement's very sluggish. There's just There's so many things that could be improved. So final thoughts. It's a kick-ass game. But I think that's how I feel about this game. Thanks for watching.